She was once the face that many people woke up to on the morning news.
After being caught on camera stealing her neighbor's Christmas lights.
But then something happened that will forever be hard to make sense of.
24 supervising agent 4 for cutting East Valley Street operating on top.
We have a major update in the case of a former news anchor police say killed her own mom. What Angie Mock just did after being ruled competent to stand trial that seems to cement the horrifying allegations she faced.
Divorce records, custody battles, DUIs. Those are the things true crime cameras usually catch when a local news face falls from grace. What the court file in Sedgwick County, Kansas actually says is this. On the morning of October 31st, 2025, a dispatcher relayed a caller's own words back to responding officers that a daughter had to stab her mother to save herself. That single line, sitting flat and procedural in a 9/11 log, is the entire tragedy of this case compressed into 9 words.
The story of Angie Mock has taken so many twists and turns. And I'm not just talking about her criminal case. I mean, you think of her life, at least what we know about it. This was someone who was once a rising star in a lot of ways in the local news industry. But then something happened which we really don't know. And it led her to be the person who we've seen in court, accused of killing her own mom. Now, even her criminal case has taken a lot of different twists and turns, especially when it comes to the question of whether Angie Mock would ever be competent to stand trial. And that makes what we learned this week in this case so shocking. This was Angie Mock in court on Friday of last week per KWCH TV in Wichita. She was emotional as the judge spoke to her.
Do you have any mental or physical conditions that would impair your ability to understand what you're doing today?
No.
Now, we did think that this might be a case where Angie Mock's defense would be related to mental health because in January, she was found incompetent to stand trial. But then late last month, the court found her competent. We'll talk about what we know about her mental health history here in just a moment and how that potentially played into the big update that just went down in this case. But before I get to that, I want to break.
Picture this. A woman who once smiled into a camera at 5 in the morning, telling an entire city to have a good day, now standing outside a house on Crowley Street, soaked in her own mother's blood, holding a towel, waiting for police. That image is the whole video. Everything else is just the paperwork behind it.
Supervising agent 4 for cutting East Valley Street operating on top.
That was the call that came into the Wichita Police Department. And when Wichita police get to a home on Crowley Street, they find the victim, 81-year-old Anita Avers. Police say that Avers was stabbed multiple times in her bed. She was rushed to the hospital and she lost her life. Now, the woman who had allegedly been covered in blood calling 911, according to witnesses, was Anita's daughter, Angeline Mock. Police arrested Angeline and they charged her with first-degree murder. They accused her of stabbing her mother multiple times, causing her death. Now, we'll talk about why Angie may have killed her mom in just a moment, even though, frankly, the question of why all of this happened may never truly be answered.
Before we go deeper into what the records actually show, make sure you're subscribed to the Crime Infinity, because we don't just cover the story, we follow the evidence. Her name is Angeline Mock.
But to understand what makes this story so incredibly shocking is you have to understand who Angie Mock once was.
Welcome, Angie Mock.
Thank you.
There you go.
I'm so excited to be here, and I look forward to connecting with you guys out there in St. Louis.
Angeline Mock, known as Angie, was someone who a lot of people tuned into when it came to morning news and sportscasts for many years in multiple cities across the country, including St. Louis, where she was a morning anchor. This is a video that is posted to Fox 2 St. Louis's public YouTube page from 2011. Now, according to Angie Mock's LinkedIn, she worked in local news for more than a decade, started off in the small market, as so many people do in that industry. I mean, it's really a grind, and I can kind of speak to this personally. It may seem glamorous on TV. It really isn't. I mean, you have to make a lot of sacrifices, and it does seem that Angie Mock professionally did pay her dues to get to a decent-sized market like St. Louis. According to LinkedIn, she started in the business November 2002. She was a sports reporter in tiny Lincoln, Nebraska. Then she moved on to Rochester, Minnesota. She worked in Missoula, Montana, then to Oklahoma City, and then to the biggest place that she worked, which was St. Louis. And she was a
For over a decade, Angie was a working broadcaster, sports desks in Nebraska and Montana, morning anchor chairs in Oklahoma City and St. Louis. By 2015, according to her own professional history, she'd left the industry behind for a career in software sales, the way a lot of burned-out anchors quietly do. Normal, unremarkable, the kind of career pivot nobody writes a headline about.
morning anchor there from March 2011 through February of 2015. And after that, it appears she got out of the business and transferred into software sales. Now, it's not uncommon for people to leave the news industry, especially when you work in morning news. The hours are brutal. I mean, a lot of times you're waking up, in some cases, like 1, 2 o'clock in the morning, day in and day out. So it's not a surprise that people end up moving on to more regular hours and a more regular, if you want to call it that, career. Now, it's unclear, though, what happened in recent years to Angie Mock, this person who had a successful broadcasting career. And then when you look back at some of her news clips, I mean, she had just great energy on the news, just seemed to be a real positive light on television. Now, it's clear that perhaps her biggest fan was her own mom, Anita Avers. This is a picture that we found from Avers' Facebook page. And then here's a picture of Angie and her mom. This was posted in 2019. Avers was a clinical therapist in Wichita. She worked with people who dealt with issues of mental health.
The headline came a decade later, when police in Wichita were called to a home where Mock's 81-year-old mother, Anita Avers, a longtime clinical therapist, was found stabbed multiple times in her own bed. Avers was rushed to the hospital. She did not survive. Here's the procedural gap you need to sit with. The woman calling 911, covered in blood, was the victim's daughter. The affidavit describes officers arriving to find kitchen knives and a cheese grater arranged deliberately on a pillow beside the body.
Let's talk about October 31st, 2025, Halloween. And there's an eyewitness who spoke to KAKE television in Wichita, and they say, after Anita Avers was killed, Angie Mock allegedly runs up to a woman and her boyfriend. They say she's acting scared, she has blood on her, and she was calling 911. I want you to listen here to what dispatchers said when they called units to that house.
In fact, you had to stab the mother to save herself.
Quote, she had to stab the mother to save herself. There's more context to that here, which we'll get to in a criminal complaint in just a moment. Now, Angie Mock was taken to the hospital as well as her mom. Police said that Mock had cuts on her hands, but it's unclear whether those were defensive wounds at this point. Mock did not appear to have any criminal history before all of this. Now, we have an affidavit in the case, and it states that when police arrived, they, quote, located a white female standing outside, bleeding, holding a towel. When police went inside, they found Anita Avers, quote, lying on the bed with multiple stab wounds to her face and torso. Police say next to Anita, on the bed, an officer located multiple kitchen-style knives and a cheese grater laid out on a pillow.
That detail was never explained in any court filing. It simply sits there, unresolved, the way the worst evidence in a case always does. When officers asked Mock what happened, her account, according to the criminal complaint, was that she'd gone to talk to her mother about an upcoming job interview at a local TV station, found her sharpening knives, and was accused by her mother of being jealous and unworthy of the job. She described her mother coming after her with a knife, described being overpowered, described her mother saying something vulgar and threatening. She said her mother began, in her words, spewing venom at her. That's when, she told police, she had to stab her to survive.
When police asked Angie Mock what happened and whether her mom was hurt, Mock allegedly said, quote, her face, eyes, and gestured to her torso area. An officer asked what happened, and Angeline said that she went to her mother's room to talk and saw her sharpening knives. Her mother came after her with a knife and fought her. Angeline was stronger, so she pushed her back. Her mother then said, quote, I know you're bleeping Jesus Christ. So she backed away. Her mother followed her, so she went around her, grabbed a knife, and got on top of her. Now, Angeline said that her mother started, quote, spewing venom at me out of her bleeping mouth, so she had to stab her to save herself. Angeline then said that she went to the bedroom to talk to her mom because she had an upcoming job interview at a local television station in Wichita. She then said that her mom was sharpening knives and was jealous of her and didn't want her to get the job. She then said that her mom chased her around the house and Angie needed to kill her mom because she wasn't going to stop. Angeline then was read her rights and said that she understood but didn't want to talk anymore. Now, police charged Mock with first-degree murder. This is the 47-year-old's mugshot, and you can see what a difference from the person who so many people saw on local news back in the day. Now, here's the criminal complaint for the case where prosecutors write, quote, Angeline Mock did then and there unlawfully.
Read that back. A grown woman, a professional with a decade in broadcast journalism, describing an assault so severe she needed a kitchen knife to defend her own life over a job interview that police could never confirm existed. The gap between what was said and what was provable is where this case actually lives. She was charged with first-degree murder. Prosecutors alleged the killing was intentional and premeditated. And this is where the case should have followed the script every viewer expects. Booking photo, arraignment, trial date, verdict. Instead, it did something almost no true crime case does. It stopped moving forward entirely. In November 2025, the court ordered a competency evaluation. By January 2026, doctors had returned a finding that should stop anyone watching this video cold. Angeline Mock was ruled incompetent to stand trial. Local reporting at the time cited a diagnosis of schizophrenia. Family members reportedly told investigators she had, in the weeks before the killing, been telling relatives that people around her, including, by some accounts, her own family, weren't real. That's not a defense attorney's spin. That's an alleged description of a mind in active break from reality.
Intentionally and with premeditation kill a human being, Anita Avers.
All right, are you Ms. Mock?
Now here's Mock making her first court appearance per KSN television in Wichita in the same voice. I mean, think about this. The same voice that was a fixture on local news for multiple years was now being used to talk to a judge as she was accused of this terrible crime. And then here's Mock appearing in court for a preliminary hearing. She walked in dressed in that orange jail jumpsuit. And this hearing that we attended, it was brief. And in that hearing, her defense argued that her case should be taken off docket, which means it was no longer active. Her attorney had requested that she be evaluated to see if she would be competent to stand trial. And at the end of the hearing, we did see Mock get up and she was brought back to custody. And we could see that she was very emotional as she was being led away. Doctors then evaluated Angie Mock, and then in January, she was found incompetent to stand trial. And when you listen to the story that she allegedly told investigators about her mom spewing venom and the things that she said her mom said to her, and the idea that she was going to go on a local news interview, it's hard to believe that any of that was taking place in reality. And it came to light after that mental health evaluation that Angie Mock reportedly had serious issues of mental health. According to 12 News in Wichita, Angie was diagnosed with schizophrenia.
So here's the question this case forces you to ask, the one no cable segment ever really sits with. How do you hold someone criminally responsible for an act committed by a version of them that medicine says may not have been capable of forming intent at all? That question sat unanswered for 7 months. Then, in late July 2026, without a public explanation of what treatment or medication regimen produced the change, the court reversed itself. Mock was found competent to stand trial, and barely 3 weeks later, she pleaded guilty to first-degree murder. This is the moment worth slowing down on, because the paperwork here tells two entirely different stories depending on which page you're reading. In her plea acknowledgment, Mock stated in her own signature that she understood her rights, that no medication was impairing her judgment, and that she knowingly waived her right to a jury trial, while also disclosing, in that same document, that she was actively taking Abilify, lithium, and 2 additional psychiatric medications. Abilify is prescribed for schizophrenia and bipolar disorder. Lithium is a mood stabilizer used to control manic and depressive episodes. A person can be legally competent and still be chemically managed into that competence.
So Mock's case in January when she was ruled incompetent to stand trial, things were quiet for a long time up until last month. Late last month, she was found competent to stand trial for the murder of her mom. Now, here's the order that came down on July 30th. And then we had yesterday, the major update in this case. Angie Mock pleaded guilty to killing her mom. This is the document that lays out her acknowledging her rights where she enters the plea. And look at line 2, quote, "I know of no reason why my mental competence should be questioned. I have not taken any drugs or medications during the past 48 hours except Abilify, lithium, and 2 additional mental health medications. Any such drugs or medications do not affect my ability to understand my rights or the consequences of this plea." Abilify is a drug that is used to treat mental health conditions like schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, and major depression. So she was dealing with some major mental health issues and was taking medication for it, according to this document. And then lithium, according to the Mayo Clinic, is a prescription mood stabilizer primarily used to treat and prevent manic and depressive episodes in bipolar disorder.
The acknowledgement does list that you have some medications that you are taking. Do any of those medications affect your ability to understand what you're doing? No.
Then you move on in this document, and line 6 reads, "I understand from discussion with my attorneys that I am pleading to the following crimes, which have the following range of penalties." It then lists murder in the first degree with a range of 25 years to life in prison. Then at the bottom of the document, you can see Angie Mock's signature.
However, by waiving your right to a jury trial today, the only portion of your case that you'll be able to appeal will be your son's. Do you understand?
Yes.
So this is a plea deal that Mock says her attorneys negotiated with her consent, and prosecutors have asked for the penalty to be life with parole after 25 years. And the agreement also lists the narrative that both parties are agreeing to. And it reads that on the day of Mock's mom's murder, Angie's stepdad left at 7:10 in the morning for work, and when he left, Anita Avers was sleeping in her bed. As soon as Angie's stepdad left, Angie entered the room and stabbed her mom to death. Angie then called 911 and police responded.
For the crime of murder in the first degree, which is an off-grid person felony, the sentencing range is 25 years to life in prison, a fine of up to $500,000, and lifetime parole. Do you understand, ma'am, that that's the sentence that you face in this case?
Yes.
Ma'am, has anyone forced you, coerced you, promised you anything, or threatened you in any way to get you to waive your right to a jury trial and enter into this plea?
No.
Mock will be in her early 70s when she becomes eligible for parole, and she is slated to be officially sentenced on October 5th. Join us.
Kansas law doesn't require the court to reconcile that contradiction. It only requires the defendant to say, on the record, that she understands. An officially recorded system doesn't always match the version of events an actual human being lived through. And this case is proof of that, stated once. Compare that plea document to the criminal complaint. The complaint is full of texture, knives sharpened out of jealousy, a mother spewing venom, a job interview that anchors the entire alleged motive. The plea agreement strips almost all of it away. Its factual narrative is spare, almost clinical. Mock's stepfather left for work at 7:10 a.m. Anita Avers was asleep. Mock entered the room and stabbed her mother to death. Mock called 911. Police responded and made an arrest. No mention of psychosis. No mention of venom. No mention of the interview. 2 documents, 2 different women. One clearly in crisis, one calmly admitting to a decision.
I want to talk more about this. Criminal defense attorney Eric Faddis, always great to have you on Law and Crime. I was surprised when I saw this guilty plea coming in, because not only were there these questions of competency over the last several months, but you go through the criminal complaint in this case, and it just didn't seem like Angie Mock was making statements that, frankly, a sane person would be making in that situation. And yet, here's the guilty plea, and she'll be sentenced in October, and it'll be, 25 to life is the recommendation from the prosecution.
Right, Chris. Some of the reports indicate that she was making statements around the time this happened to her family that they were, quote, "they're all robots. not real people, just that statement alone suggests that there might be some detachment from reality. And then when you look at her alleged mental health history, the fact that she was found incompetent by a court, which is a significant finding, I think it was a bit surprising to many legal commentators that she is now going to plead guilty in what appears to be a defensible case.
That is not a contradiction the justice system is required to explain to the public. It's simply the version both sides agreed to sign. Under the negotiated agreement, prosecutors are recommending life with the possibility of parole after 25 years. If the sentence is imposed as proposed, Angeline Mock will be in her early 70s before she's eligible for release. She is scheduled to be formally sentenced on October 5th. An officially recorded system doesn't always match the version of events an actual human being lived through. And here, the gap runs both directions. A criminal defense attorney reviewing this case would likely note that Kansas applies one of the narrowest legal standards for an insanity-based defense in the country. It's not enough to show a defendant didn't know right from wrong. The defense would have had to prove the mental disease made her literally incapable of forming intent or premeditation. A bar so high that juries, even sympathetic ones, rarely cross it.
Sure. So, Chris, as you're aware, incompetency to stand trial is different than not guilty by reason of insanity. Incompetency to stand trial in Kansas basically says a person has a mental disease or defect that makes them unable to either understand what's going on or to assist in their defense, or both. So she was in that place in January. It's August. It hasn't been that long. Typically, when there's an incompetency finding, there are restoration proceedings. So medical providers try to treat the defendant, try to medicate her, and get her back to a place where she understands what's going on and can assist in her defense. According to the court, they did get her back to that place. And now we have a guilty plea. But I think questions loom about her capacity, not only on the date of incident, but also on the date of the plea.
Right. That was going to be another one of the questions I have, because you read through the document where she's accepting this plea and she, says that she's on medications, which when you look it up, these are medications that are used to treat people who have very serious mental health issues like schizophrenia, which she reportedly has. And then, it goes through and she says, I am in the right mind. She signs it herself. So it's like on paper, she's accepting this plea. But then at the same time, though she's competent to stand trial, like you do find yourself wondering, like, it feels a bit confusing that she would go in this direction when it does seem like, and we don't know, maybe she'll speak at sentencing in October and there's a little bit more clarity here, that there was an argument to be made that she could be found not guilty by reason of insanity.
I think that argument was at the very least on the table. There had been reports about sort of an escalation of mental health issues, including that her husband had noticed and that her husband talked about prior incidents. In fact, a prior 2-week hospitalization before these stabbings. And so that is all grounds to certainly strongly consider a not guilty by reason of insanity defense. I would note, too, that in looking at the Kansas law, the judge can consider these mental health issues in terms of what the sentence will be, but the sentence she's facing now is 25 to life.
That may explain, structurally, why a plea was negotiated instead of a trial risked. It does not explain why a woman found incompetent in January was pleading guilty by August, with no public accounting of what changed beyond a course of medication. There's also the question of what happens later. Plea agreements like this one are designed to be close to unbreakable. A defendant answers a judge's questions on the record, confirms she understands, confirms no one coerced her, and signs. But documented psychiatric history doesn't disappear because a signature says otherwise. If Mock, or her attorneys, ever attempt to withdraw this plea on competency grounds, the state's argument writes itself. She said she understood.
He wants takebacks on what happened involving his case where he takes this plea. But, the parallel I'm drawing is, we all watched Brian Kohberger answer questions to the judge. Like, yes, I'm doing this. Yes, I understand there's no appeal. Yes, I understand these are the terms of the deal. And yet, though a very small chance, like there is still this sliver that he can make an argument that potentially opens the door once again. When you read through the Angie Mock document and what she's agreeing to, if on October 5th, The judge accepts this and she gets 25 to life. And then 6 months later, she decides, well, wait a second, I wasn't in the right frame of mind of all of this. Everybody missed everything. Like, how binding is what she's agreeing to here in this deal?
I think there are multiple interpretations. The prosecutor's going to say, look, bro, it's in black and white. Like, she agreed to these things. She signed her name on that line. She read this. She went through each provision and she didn't have any problem with it then. Oh, now all of a sudden that she is, behind bars. Now she wants to take it back. On the defense side, that if such a issue did arise, defense would say, hey, she was still struggling from these mental health issues. Schizoaffective disorder is extremely serious. And this is just a document. And how can you say she even read it? Yeah, she says she did because she needed to get through this proceeding and get to the next phase. But that's not conclusive evidence as to her understanding and her capacity to understand at the time. So it can go both ways.
And then, the last part, looking at the plea document, because you have the criminal complaint where these allegations that she said all of this stuff, where it's like, what world is she living in? Like, as she's saying this, like, it really appears to be someone having a mental health crisis, though she committed an absolutely horrific act. It's a very slim version of that story in the plea document, where it pretty much says, Anita Avers' husband leaves for work. Angie Mock grabs a knife. She stabs her mom to death multiple times. She calls 911. Police arrest her and charge her with murder. And it's both parties have agreed that this is the narrative of what happened. And there is no conversation whatsoever about mental health or any of these statements. Like, how does that part of the plea document work? Like, how do you get to that point?
Sure. Simple as that, isn't it? That must just be the material aspects of this case, right?
She read every provision. She signed on the line. Whether that signature can survive a documented schizophrenia diagnosis under psychiatric medication is a fight for a courtroom, not a comment section, but the paperwork already exists to have that fight. An officially recorded system doesn't always match the version of events an actual human being lived through. We're not going to tell you what verdict this deserved. We're not going to tell you what Angeline Mock was thinking on October 31st, because the honest answer is that even the court doesn't fully know. It just knows what it can prove and what it's willing to accept a signature for. What we point you toward instead is the actual plea acknowledgment filed in Sedgwick County District Court, the same one quoted from in this video, along with the competency evaluation orders from January and July 2026. Both are public record. Read them yourself. Then answer this in the comments. When a defendant's own signed plea contradicts the mental state described in her own arrest affidavit, which document should carry more legal weight? And should courts be required to explain that contradiction publicly before a plea is accepted? If this case raised more questions for you than it answered, that's the point. Like this video, share it, subscribe, and turn on notifications for the Crime Infinity, because we don't just cover the story. We follow the evidence.